Hi, welcome back to Yeah Right, Scarlet Quill Society. It is May of 2024, which means that you know enough to do the like and the subscribe and the bell and all of the YouTube things. Um, I don't have to hold your hand through that. What I do have to hold your hand through is this month's topic, which is traditional publishing. And we are so excited to have Natalie here to talk with us about traditional publishing. She is the author of Hench, link in the description, link is on our page. Go buy her book, it's great. And I'm not just saying that because I get paid to. I don't get paid enough to say that, honestly. I would never. Um, before we dive into traditional publishing, and while I give my dog a treat that I'm going to drop on the floor, um, there it is. I'm sorry, baby. Before we dive in, I do want to do our monthly housekeeping. One of the things that is important to us here at Yeah Right is to acknowledge that even though we have moved sort of into this virtual space, we do have a nexus with the land that we live on. And for Yeah Right, that means the place that the majority of our editors are concentrated, which is the traditional and the current home of a number of tribes. It's a confluence of rivers, it's a confluence of streams. There were more than 60 tribes in Oregon before it was settled by colonists. Today, there are 9 federally recognized tribes, but the tribes whose land we live on currently, again, many, the Multnomah, the Wasco, the Cowlitz, Cathlamet, and Clackamas, the bands of Chinook, Tualatin, the Kalapuya, and the Molalla. And because of this diversity among the peoples, one of the things that Yeah Right does is we donate to, just land acknowledgement feels so weird if you're not doing something to give back. So we give to the Naya Family Center, which provides culturally specific programs and services that guide people in the direction of personal success and balance through cultural empowerment. And I want to invite Natalie to, make the same acknowledgements. And I'm going to just screw up this transition as hard as I can. Natalie, take over, save me from
I will
myself.
save you. I will save you from yourself. I would like to acknowledge that I'm located in Mi'kmaq, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This is also known as Nova Scotia in eastern Canada. I acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. The territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown back in 1725. These treaties did not surrender this land and the resources, as some treaties did. Uh, but in fact, recognized both the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet title, established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between those nations. So we're all treated people, and I'm currently on unceded land. Mi'kmaq includes all of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and also parts of New Brunswick, the Gaspé region of Quebec, parts of Maine, and southwestern Newfoundland.
That's a range.
Yeah,
I always
it's
feel like my land acknowledgement is so small. I'm like, here's this one tiny corner, and there's like a million people that used it, and then there's like you move farther east, and the spread is incredible.
it's really
Um,
wild.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into our topic.
Mhm.
Um, so traditional publishing, right?
Mhm.
Which I need to distinguish briefly from other kinds of publishing, in terms of, well, are you self-publishing? There's also vanity publishing, which is sort of self-publishing that you pay someone else to do for you. And we're
Yes.
going to talk a lot about that in the last third of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of push that ball a little farther down the road for everybody. But we're talking about what most people think of when they think about classic publishing. Like you're going to sit down, you're going to have an idea for a book, maybe you're going to write the whole book, maybe you're not, depending on what genre you're working in. Um, you're going to maybe find an agent, maybe not, depending on what your relationships with people are and what your needs are. And then a publishing house is going to be like, yes, that's for us. Um, and you went through, do you want to describe how you got through that process with Hench? Acknowledging
Mhm.
obviously like everybody's process is going to look different, and some of it's going to depend on who you know, what your background is, what you look like,
Totally.
all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm super happy to, and I do want to emphasize that like my experience is going to be the experience that I had specifically, and I recognize very much that some of this is maybe like not replicable. By which I mean like there is definitely like luck is a real thing. Happening to be like in exactly the correct place and meeting exactly the correct person at that time is which I know is not necessarily helpful in terms of like, here is what you can do. But it is like important to acknowledge that not
Right,
all of
yeah.
these steps can be exactly replicated in necessarily the way that they happened. But the first kind of like major step for sure in my uh when it comes to traditional publishing was getting an agent. I had an agent before I started to write the book, before I even knew what the book was going to be. And that in itself was kind of a like a very interesting and strange process. I got my agent when I was primarily writing nonfiction and arts and culture journalism.
Mhm,
I was writing a lot about like arts and culture in general, doing a lot of like film and gallery reviews, but primarily music journalism.
mhm,
That was my full time job, and in particular, I was focused on aggressive music, and I was focused on women's contributions to aggressive music. I had a column called "Girls Don't Like Metal" at one point, which was a direct quote that was said to me
mhm.
that I decided to make everybody's problem. Um, very
Yes.
successfully. And My agent is a man named Ron Eckel, and he liked my music writing. He found
Mhm,
me via my music writing, and also like a lot of the he became a fan of both those pieces and also just kind of my presence on Twitter in general,
right.
and kind of thought I was interesting and funny on social media, as well as really enjoying the music writing that I was doing. We happened to, upon meeting, he approached me himself based on that.
Mhm,
Like he wrote me an email when it happened to be at a moment in his career when he was like actively looking for new
yeah.
clients.
And I
Um,
know that, like, this doesn't feel replicable to a lot of
mhm.
people, but some of it is a matter of putting yourself in a position where you can be at that right place at the right time, right? Like, you
Oh,
were
totally.
active on Twitter, you're
Yes.
doing the columns, you are putting the material out into the world, maybe not with that specific goal of an agent materializing out of the
Hmm.
ether to tell you that he loves your work, um, although, wouldn't we all love that?
Oh,
But,
for sure.
if you weren't doing that underlying work, that can't happen, right? So,
Absolutely. Like he would have, if I had been, if I had no public presence whatsoever and I wasn't writing constantly and I wasn't like doing in that like extremely active cycle of like creating a piece, promoting it, creating a piece, promoting it, talking about what I was
yeah.
doing, engaging with other people who were passionate about the same things I was in a very kind of public and
Mhm.
identifiable way. Um, and also doing that about things like I genuinely had a real deep vested interest in,
Yeah.
right? Like it
Right,
was
it's not
very
just
much
pushing content, it's pushing content that matters to you, that's
yeah, that
about who
matters
you
really
are.
totally. It matters really deeply. It's a core part of my personality and my aesthetic, and it like accurately I think represented the person that I was. Um,
Yeah.
so he and I knew we wanted to work together like long. and had an agreement in place like long before there was a book.
Hmm.
And we, there was a period of like several years where we would kind of like every 6 to 12 months like meet for lunch and chat and like make
Hmm.
sure the other was good and kind of check in on like what was going on. We like kind of floated a few ideas past each other that like went various steps of the way through, like maybe this will become a thing.
Hmm.
And eventually I had a very rough draft of the book that would be Hench. And I sent it to him.
Yeah.
And to my great delight, he really liked it.
I don't know
And
what's not to like about it. Like it's,
thank you.
well, especially at the time,
Hmm.
it felt really, really of the moment, as well as having that sort of like, oh, well, we're in this sort of timeless place of super villains and a very familiar world, and then we're looking at it through this like temp agency lens, like those little stories against the big backdrop, especially since I'm trying to like contextualize this in terms of like the MCU, right? Like which
Oh
Marvel
yeah,
films are,
yeah, for
and it's
sure.
very like main character, main character, main character, and you're like, what if you're not the main character though?
What
Like,
about everybody else in the
what do the rest of us
background?
do?
What about so I've always been obsessed with hench people in superhero movies, and I'm old. So when I was a kid, for me that meant like the old Batman films,
Yeah,
right? Like even,
yep.
right? And like before
Who's
that, like
making Bat Shark repellent?
who is doing this? Like or like there's I think it's in Batman and Robin, the one where Arnold Schwarzenegger is Mr. Freeze.
Hmm.
I believe that is
That's
Batman and
right.
Robin.
Yeah,
And
and nipple armors and Arnold
yes,
Schwarzenegger.
exactly that
Yeah.
one. So Mr. Freeze obviously has like this full army of henchmen, and they
Yeah.
are all wearing like neon like cold themed
Yes.
outfits. And at one point they rob a gallery like on skates, and there's like
Yes.
this whole like skate battle, and it's like, okay, let's think this through. These are all like at least AAA hockey players, right?
Right. Like,
Like
where do we
that is
hire
what I
these
am.
people?
Who? How, like where did you find them? How did each of them get to this place in their life where like how behind on your child support are you that you're like, I am going to work for Mr. Freeze and
Right.
wear this
And it's
outfit
like,
and rob this gallery?
I'm gonna go to Gotham,
First of all, do you live in if you live in Gotham already, like this is such a bad, how this is going to go. Like this is
right?
such a bad series of choices. If you don't live in Gotham, you're like, I am going to move to Gotham. We're
Yeah.
just the beginning of every terrible decision, and
Yeah.
like ruin my life, my already ruined life in this way. So I needed to know, like, how did all of these people get here? What horrible sequence of events? I want to know every one of their terrible stories. Like I need to know this. Uh
Right.
and
Like, and I think that the closest that we come to that in mainstream media is Hawkeye, right?
yes, yeah.
Because he is the cheap circus henchman
Hmm.
that is disposable, that is in this for no real reason other than his options are so limited. And then
Yeah.
he main characters himself and it becomes like less relevant. You're like, okay, but what happened to the rest of the circus?
Right. I really liked Circus Hawkeye. Right. Like I
Right?
really liked like Whole Pot of Coffee, like
Yes.
Disaster
Oh,
Hawkeye. Like
coffee,
that's,
no.
what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
I really I wanted a whole book that would stay there, and I waited for it for a very long time, and eventually realized that like no, it was
Mm.
I who was
Gonna have to
going
write
to
it
have to.
yourself.
I have
Yeah.
to, like I come from a fan fiction background. That is
Hmm.
probably like where I like learned to write, like in
Yeah.
that kind of wish fulfillment way the most. Both like in the horrible self-indulgent stuff that I did, but also just what I read when I was like a teenager, right? Like
Yeah.
so much. And all of that is like, I just want this to exist in the world so bad. Like, I
Yeah.
just
I need
want this
these stories.
story. I need this specific story in this specific universe to exist so badly. And so, yeah, there was definitely a point where it's like, well, I guess I am just going to have to do this myself.
Yeah.
And so the first draft was for sure like it was a mess. It was fun, but it was a mess. But yeah, but my agent liked it anyway, and then we spent
Mhm.
like a very for me stressful 6 months ish,
Yeah.
like banging it and this is after I had already like gone through
Yeah.
the whole like dark night of the soul on more than one occasion, like trying
How
to write this
dare I
stupid
think I
thing,
can do
right? Yeah,
this? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, like crying. Uh, we went through a very intense kind of additional 6 months of revisions, where like he gave me notes, and other folks at the agency who worked with him gave me notes, and we did a whole bunch of editing. And then at that point, when we sort of felt like he and I had got it to the place that we could get it to the
Yeah.
farthest, which isn't done, by the way, to be clear, but like we got it
Right.
as good as we could do it.
Is that
Um,
is that place right there basically the place that you would be sending it to an agent if you hadn't already had an agent?
yes. Yeah, I think
Right? That
so.
that
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
like
Yeah, that
the
that
place
is
that most
yeah.
people, because you wouldn't ever send an agent as rough of a first draft. And I know
No, for sure not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that
I
is
almost
sorry.
got
I just
Claire
like
on here too
I'm
to talk about her process, and then I realized that like she got published. Claire Willett, everybody, the Rewind
oh,
Files, go
yes.
by
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
too.
Oh my God,
Um,
she's so brilliant.
she's so brilliant. I love her so much. But her process was literally she got an outline done for a nano novel and 2 chapters, and her
Wow.
brother knew a new publishing house that was looking for um a bench,
Mhm.
and was like, "Can you read this chapter?" And she was like, there's no book there. Um, there's no book there." And they were like, "Well, could there be?" So
Right.
like you would never send that to an agent. And I'm like, I only know people with these really anomalous stories as opposed to,
Yeah, like what
and
you're
I think that
supposed to do.
some of it is just because my friend group tends to select not mainstream
Mhm.
cis het white writers.
Right.
And so I think that a lot of our peer group tends to find alternate paths to telling the stories we want to tell. Like if those stories get told, it's because we knew somebody or because we were positioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I had that established relationship with my editor. I had sent or sorry, my agent. I had sent him stuff before that was like in similar like disastrous kind of places, or that we're like, hey, I have this idea, what do you think of this outline, right? We had sort of gone through that process a lot.
Yeah.
And I also had the security of like we already have a relationship, like we have already signed with each other, we like and trust each other, like we
Hmm.
know that we're both like have the other person's like best interests in mind while we're doing this. So he was a trusted person on my side.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
felt comfortable being like, hey, the back half of this is definitely still a mess, but I think there's something here. And he's like, there absolutely is something here. Let's like, I would love to give you some notes and take it to that kind of like as close as we can get it to the finish line, not
Hmm.
being at either of us editors ourselves, so that we feel like we can put it in front of somebody who like will be able to recognize what it can be.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's I definitely sent it to him much earlier than I would have sent it to somebody that I did not have that rapport with. Or but the state at which I sent it to, or we ended up, I mean I should say I sent it to the publisher because I definitely did not, he did. But at the point where we were like, okay, we are ready to do this now, it like that would be the point at which I would have sent it to an agent
Right.
if I did not have one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I got tea delivery.
Ooh, very exciting.
This is
So
very,
fancy.
very exciting.
Mhm.
Um, and I want to note for everybody, if you're sitting here thinking this, like the best you can do, the farthest you can take it is not going to be what gets published. There's
Absolutely not. No, for
there's going to
yeah,
be
that you're
more,
totally right.
and learn how not to be defensive when people tell you that there's more to be done, because the best you can do, you're gonna miss something.
Mhm.
There's gonna be somebody's gonna have a thought, and it's gonna be brilliant, and it's gonna adjust things, or else your co-writer is going to come and look at you and be like, "But why wasn't he on the airship to begin with?" And then you have to, like,
You're like,
rewrite your entire novel, and then it's just gonna sit there in a trunk for a while you're mad at it because it's your punishment pile. But, there's gonna be more, but that's not an excuse for not doing the best you can do to begin with. You
right.
want it to be as good as you can get it, and then
Mhm.
you need somebody to recognize the potential to be great and not
Yes.
just good.
Mhm.
So, there's
And that's
there's an
not
interesting, like, you can be protective. You wanna be protective, you
mhm.
wanna love what you're doing, but not so protective that you prevent it from. How did you manage to strike that balance as Hench was going through the editing process? Like, did
That
your
is a
publisher
really
give you another editor that you had to work
yes,
with, or yeah.
yeah. So yes. I will there's a tiny bit of explaining that I think needs to go into
Yeah.
that first, but like that is a really great question. So um the editor for like the publisher we ultimately went with, um it was submitted to multiple places at once.
Mhm.
I think it was sent out to about 10. About 3 ended up being really interested to the
Mhm.
point where I had conversations with 3 editors
Okay.
who were all lovely. And there was definitely a person um, who. Who stood out to me as like I have a rapport with this person, and
Right.
also they get like they are picking up what I am putting down, right? Like
Yeah.
they get it. They have grokked what I am doing here.
Right, because you don't want
Um
an editor that's gonna make it their book, you want an editor who's gonna make
mhm.
it the best version of your book.
Exactly. And who recognizes like what you are like what is the point of this thing,
Yeah.
right? Like what are we trying to get
What's
this
the
to the
heart
same
of this
place?
book? Yeah.
Totally, because if you can get somebody who like sees you and sees the book and like wants to
Mhm.
make the book the best version of that book, not like some other more different book over here, but wants to make this
Yeah.
book the best version of this book it can be, if you can find that person, then it's a lot easier to trust them because even if
Yeah.
it's like, okay, um, we might
Right,
not
we
exactly agree on how to get there or like how we're going to resolve
mhm.
like this one time, but those are all details and you can sort that out and it literally doesn't matter, right? Like, but
Yeah.
if the goal is the
Right, if
same,
you're going different places, then this
that's when it
decision
becomes a
point.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was again very lucky in that it turned out that the person who I got on with, like that was also when the offers came in, like unquestionably the best offer.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
so I
Hashtag serendipity.
probably like yeah, it was great. It was great luck. Honestly, like I would have if it was like close, probably
Yeah.
gone with a less ideal offer to work with a better person.
Yeah.
Um, I did not have to make that decision, which is
That's
spectacular.
great, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, like
Yeah.
I absolutely was like very lucky in that
Mhm.
particular regard that like that ended up matching up. But getting a good by the way, that my editor is David Pomerico, um, who is and oh, sorry, this is the part I wanted to explain. So
Yeah.
um, the like overarching publishing house is HarperCollins.
Mhm.
We submitted to the imprint Voyager. So Harper Voyager, that's
Mhm.
the like sci-fi the
Yeah, a
sci-fi
lot of
imprint.
publishing houses sort of break out into smaller genre imprints, so you're
Yes,
still, like, with HarperCollins, but you're also with Voyager, with that
exactly.
piece.
Right, right. But in this particular case, David thought that it would do better um, under William Morrow, which is a
Right.
literary fiction imprint that also does some speculative fiction. He, despite the fact that we submitted it to his imprint, he took it to William Morrow and was like, "I think." you should have this
Right.
if
This
you
is the
let me
fit.
edit it. Right. So he in fact internally shifted it to a different imprint where he felt like it would thrive a little bit more, which is, never something I would have known or recognized or would
Right?
have,
Yeah.
of course, asked for. That's not something I could have possibly requested or even foreseen. But I
Mhm.
think that that was an important part of that process, was like it didn't even go exact like where I thought it
Yeah.
would. It went slight, there was a lateral move there that ended up being very important. So HarperCollins is my publisher, my imprint is William Morrow, my editor is David Pomerico, who is actually the head of Harper Voyager, but who sort of moonlighted into William
Mhm.
Morrow to work on this particular book.
So that's a path.
That's a journey.
That's
And again,
yeah.
yeah, that is for sure a journey. And
Yeah.
again, like not one that I certainly not one that I calculated. I was never like, oh, I would be wonderful if this like
Yeah.
extremely weird lateral move happened. It was just, he was like, I in that very first conversation we had,
Mhm.
he let me and my agent know, like, this is how I
Yeah.
think I would really like to do this, and this is why. And we were like, if you end up making an offer, that sounds rad as hell. So
Right.
and that is very happily the way that that ended up going.
So when you were evaluating between these offers and
Yes,
looking at the potential, does the potential contract come along with the offer?
it
Or
does.
okay, so what of that did your agent help you evaluate? Did an attorney need to get involved? How did that play out? Because I know a lot of people find the contract stage super intimidating,
It's
and
super scary.
especially now where we're talking a lot about, you always want your book to get optioned for a movie, but
Mhm,
even just audiobook rights, especially now with AI doing more reading, and what can AI do, what can't it do,
mhm.
what kind of secondary works and secondary markets is my book going to be in? Like, how does your agent help you evaluate that? And
For
how would you
sure.
evaluate it on your own? I mean, I don't even, you don't need to obviously like tell everyone in the world how to evaluate it on your own, but like just
Mhm.
talking about the stuff that can come up, I think a lot of people just are not positioned where they're hearing the conversations about like, oh, my audio, I wanted my audiobook rights, or I gave first printing rights but
Mhm.
second printing has a reversion,
Right,
stuff like
right,
that.
right. Yeah, no, that again, like, really great question. So there's an offer letter and then there's the contract. So I should just specify that when I got the offers, um which is like eventually or what happened in my case is after we had submitted and we got expressions of interest, my agent set a time limit that's like, okay, offers are due at like on this day at this time.
Right.
So they would be submitted kind of all at the same time and we could evaluate
Right,
together.
so you didn't have
And
to worry about like
it,
that thing
exactly
where
like
you're like looking at a job and you get an offer but you're waiting to hear back from company 2.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's like all of them are due on this day at this time. We will get back to, you know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah.
that's just to kind of like manage that process a little bit more. And at that point you get an offer which has kind of the big stuff broken out.
Mhm.
But it doesn't really go into the fine detailing of like exactly how like
Right.
audiobook versus ebook versus like comic, whatever, a billion
Yeah.
other adaptations. Like it doesn't necessarily break all that out in the fine
Mhm.
details. It's just sort of like, here are the big, the big
Right.
pieces. And then later you will get a contract that has everything
Mm.
much spelled out in much more detail, and you have an opportunity. So you typically like sign the offer letter the day that it arrives, and it's very like, you don't have to worry too much about all of the small stuff. It's the like, are you getting an advance? When is it due? How
Right.
is that broken out? What are kind of the big pieces? It's usually
Especially
something
if you're
like,
like, especially if you're writing like nonfiction where maybe the book
mhm,
is literally not written yet and
yes,
you're pitching, you have, maybe you and your agent or just you have approached a publisher and said, I have this experience, I want to write a book about it. Looking at, do you get a lump advance? Do you get little pieces of advance to live on while you're writing the book?
mhm.
That's something really to keep in mind, especially if you're a nonfiction writer.
Totally, yeah, and, like, looking at when how many pieces it's broken into and when those pieces are paid out is a really important, like, part of that
Yeah.
process. Like, ideally, you want, and this is obviously a very hard and fast rule, but, ideally, you want fewer payments, like,
Mhm.
broken into, uh with at least one due at signing,
Mhm.
or upon, like, submission of the initial manuscript, right? So you want
Yeah.
that, like, first, but again, like, that's an ideal situation. When the actual contract came through, which was a few weeks later, my agency has, like, in-house counsel, so
Right.
they reviewed it in detail. My agent and in-house counsel were able to go over it with me, like,
Yeah,
sort of very,
huge
very
advantages to
finely.
working with an agent here.
Huge, especially, and not just like an independent agent, but my agent is um uh is part of a house.
Yeah,
So they have lawyers on
just
staff. They
resources,
have,
yeah.
exactly, like, there are, they have internal payroll. They have, like, it's a whole thing. So you can lean on that, right? So
Yeah.
in my particular case, or somebody in kind of a similar case, I would be like, lean on the resources available to you, right? Like, get
Yep.
somebody to explain all those fine details. I'm also
I
very
know
lucky in that my
sorry.
partner is, oh no, is totally fine. Just my
You're
partner
good.
is very, like, well versed in, like, IP and contract law, just as
Mhm.
he's done a lot of, like, copyright consulting, so
Yeah.
is able to like, go
You can
over
issue
that with
spot at
me.
least, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's for sure, like, he often as my lawyer, he often, like, fills that role for me, where it's like, this language is sus.
Right?
Or, like,
I
this
know,
is
like, I have the
cultural
advantage
rights
of
or whatever.
being a lawyer. If
Mm,
you're in the US, one thing that people don't ever think about with those advances is how it looks on their taxes and the timing
mhm.
of your payouts for your advance if you're in the
Yes.
US. I don't know how it looks in Canada, but certainly in the US, you wanna think about, uh, do I want this all to land on this year where I maybe don't have the money to pay it versus
Mhm.
landing differently because in the
Right.
US, smaller payouts over more time can actually have an advantage that
Right,
way
yeah, that is
because
very true.
you can deal with your tax situation because this is not you're not a W-2 employee. You don't have somebody
Mhm.
taking out payroll tax for you. You don't
Yep.
have somebody taking out, you know, your GST, you don't have somebody else handling that. It is again, lean on your agent, lean on they will know. They will
Yeah,
have experience here.
I got a, like, arts specific accountant. And I did this back, like, I started working with my accountant just when I was freelancing, because it's like, hey, I
Yeah.
have my income is from 1,500 sources
Yeah.
in, like, 50 to $1,500 increments. Like, I cannot, I have
Relatable.
so many T4s, like, I do not know how to do this. And so I when I was sort of in, like, freelancer
Yeah.
hell with my taxes the first year, I found a wonderful accountant where I could, like, bring my sad shoebox to her and be like, please help me. So I had, she was immensely helpful when it came to sorting out all of that stuff. In Canada,
Yeah.
you can kind of, like, I don't want to say, like, choose exactly, but advances occupy a kind of, like, taxi in terms of the
Yeah,
timing.
there's like a nebulous space that they're
Totally,
in,
because
and
it's
you can
like,
go one way or the other to
yeah, it's
take
like, oh,
advantage.
I
Yeah.
it arrived this, like, you can claim it. You have the option to claim it in, like, a few different years. Again, like,
Yeah,
kind of
you do in the
complicated,
US
but
too.
yeah,
You do
you
in the US too,
where
whether it's, like, due on receipt or due on
Mhm,
invoice. Like, you
exactly.
can move some money around, and we're gonna talk more about moving money around later this
Mhm,
year, for self-publishers who don't necessarily have this advantage, um, with Annie Bellett, who I'm super
oh,
excited to have on,
very exciting.
but yeah, leveraging my personal contacts like crazy this year. No,
Excellent.
excuse me, the hot tea delivery is only doing so much. I am gonna be so excited to get this allergy test over with and get back to my daily diet of antihistamines.
Mhm.
Um, but so you're talking about taking advantage of the agent. What do you get to take advantage of with your publishing house?
Oh,
too.
wow.
Like what did they do in this?
They
Like
they
once
do
you're with them.
once you're with them, right? Yeah. So they do a ton. So that means you will have some kind of a marketing budget,
Hmm.
right? Exactly what and how much and what that means, like very much depends on who you're with and what their resources are and the specific
Yeah.
imprint. Um,
And your
but they're going to
contract and
yeah, and the specific contract you have, but they take care of, in addition to like editing, working on the book with your
yeah.
editor and making it the best possible book it can be. Like that is kind of a, I'm going to put that aside because while invaluable, that
Hmm.
is like a slightly different thing. But they do take care of fact checking if that is a
Hmm.
necessary thing. They take care of all of the layout, the copy editing.
Hmm.
So all of the decisions around and this I was consulted on all of the aesthetic decisions, and that included like internal layout and font choice and cover.
Right. Does a
But
new chapter start on a new
E-
page? Is this person?
Exactly. Like all of that stuff was things I had input on in my particular case. And again, that was specified in my contract
Hmm.
that like had a vested interest in doing all of that.
Yeah.
I was a part of the
Cover.
cover design
Yeah.
process. Yeah. So like shown drafts, gave feedback, etc. Like a part
Hmm.
of that process. But they took care of it. They had like in-house artists
Yeah.
or potentially would hire hire an
Right.
independent
You'd hire a
artist, but like
freelancer. But
either way. um and then of course like anything associated with like the actual physical printing of the book, all of, probably this goes without saying, but like all of the shipping, all of the fulfillment, all of the distribution, like that is entirely
getting it into
handled.
bookstores,
Yep.
libraries, making the announcement, ISBN,
Yep.
all of the
All of that.
moving parts. Yeah.
Yeah, anything involved with the like physical making of the book, the aesthetic choices around the book, and all of the stuff that kind of like makes the book be an existing thing in the world. So like getting it onto all the lists that it is a part
Hmm.
of. They also, and this is something that you can do too, but they are also responsible for getting out review copies to
Hmm.
publications that do so, to independent reviewers, to you know
The cover blurbs,
everybody
right?
totally, yeah, like, but also like just straight up reviews. So
Hmm.
like getting it in front of somebody at Publishers Weekly, like getting
Right.
it to the literary sections of newspapers and arts
Hmm.
and culture magazines, even people on like book talk, right?
Yeah.
Like your publisher can be involved in that. But also, uh, you also have a significant, or at least I had a significant say in that, because so I could say, like, here are people I want to that have
Right.
a copy of my book because I think they are like important creatively, or like I think this
Right. Or
reviewer will like them, or like I love this person's book talk content, please get them a copy. And like I can still ask for that today. Like Hinge
hmm.
came out in 2020, and there are for
Hmm.
sure people I've like have come across like in the last couple of months where I'm like, hey, could you send?
Yeah.
I really like this person. Could you send them a copy? Um, and you can also do it yourself because you can, at least my contract specified I get a certain number of author copies,
Hmm.
and part of that is to like just hand
Right.
them to people physically or mail them to somebody physically that I like really 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 want to have a copy of that book.
Right.
Or in my particular case, there's a natural disaster researcher in New Zealand whose
Right.
work I directly cite, who just very generously like let me cite him for free. I'm like,
Hmm.
can I please cite your academic work in my book?
Yeah.
And he was like, absolutely, that sounds fantastic. And I just like paid the like $70 of shipping or
I
whatever
know. It's
nonsense to send it to
ridiculous.
New Zealand to like get him a hardcover, just to be like, thank you. That was incredibly
Yeah.
lovely and generous of you. So that's like, there are definitely parts of that, like probably you want to handle personally, or that like you can kind of charge on yourself, or if you want to do that kind of like, I really want to like hand send this to this person.
Right, like, if
um
you have a relationship with somebody,
mhm,
like, "Oh, I've been going back and forth on Book Talks, splicing with these people, um, I wanna do this," or I know somebody who got a boost from it was somebody at a research station, I literally cannot remember where, I can't even remember if it was, like, a hot or a cold place, I am such a trash friend, but they got their book into the stack of This Is What's on My Nightstand when the This Is What's on My Nightstand thing was going around.
oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a huge boost from that.
That's very cool. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
any of those things, any of those like particular individual relationships that you want to nurture, like maybe you want to do that personally, but you can also ask your publisher to do that,
Yeah.
and they will have their own contacts and the people that they have long-standing relationships to that they're going to send stuff out
Yeah.
to, and like all of that is a part of what they're doing and what they're doing for you.
Yeah. So, I keep sort of coming back to, everybody's process is anomalous. Everybody's process is anomalous. But what was your biggest surprise? Because I think we all have this vision in our head
Yeah.
of what trad pub looks like.
Mhm.
What was a surprise for you in the process?
Um I mean, honestly, like, I think two things. First of all, just like how well it went. It was, like
Yeah.
it was just like everybody I worked with was lovely, right? Like my agent ended
Right.
up being an absolute rock star. My editor was a joy to work with, and was one of the first things that he said to me was like, "This is your book, and any edit I make or suggest is a suggestion, right? Like." You don't have,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like you are making all of the final decisions. And like that was incredibly liberating, and also like let me trust him a lot.
Yeah.
And like just how well our relationship went was like very surprising. Um it ended up being Hinch was selected to be like the lead read of that particular season,
Mhm.
which meant like which is an internal designation that means like this is the book we are all really getting behind for this fall,
Right.
which meant like a like much larger marketing budget than it would have had
Right.
otherwise, and what it had was already very surprising. So just I think that like the intensity of like how much support I had and how
Mhm.
enthusiastic everybody was, and like general like
Right.
genuinely very motivated to make this thing succeed was incredibly surprising. Like I expected that to be much more of a like
And
uphill
ex
battle, but they
I know
they
we hear
really
all the
championed it.
stories. I know we hear all the stories from our friends of like, "Oh, but then I had to do all of my own marketing, and I had to do
Right.
all of my own tours set up, and I had to do all of my own readings set up."
Mhm.
And so it really still can go either way, even though the industry is changing, and it's something to look for in your contract. What's your marketing budget? What are they gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Mhm.
Um,
What are your responsibilities, right? Like what
yeah,
are so there was, yeah, for sure, that definitely. And then like the other thing that surprised me came to surprise me later, because a question that I got a lot in interviews, or just like in general kind of right around when the book was published, was like, how hard was it to publish a superhero novel,
right.
because like superhero novels don't sell, or like we don't really know how, your book is kind of weird, it's like both fantasy and also sci-fi
Mhm.
and also kind of romancy, and also like it's been categorized as horror, like there's all of these, we don't really know where it fits. And so was it
Right.
like it must have been so hard to sell like this weird book that doesn't really fit
Mhm.
in a category and also is a superhero book. And I'm like, literally nobody so told me any of that until after the book was published. Like
Mhm.
at no point was my agent like, "Oh, this is a superhero book, so it's not going to sell,"
Right.
or you need to choose what category of spec fic this belongs to, or you're never going to be like. The only time any of that was brought to me was from other people after the book was published.
Mhm.
So I think just like just write the thing you want to write. Don't worry too much about like, oh, I have to make sure it's marketable in this specific way, or that it fits
Yeah.
really neatly into this category, or that it like works within this trope category in a particular kind of way. Um,
I think
because like
that's
I
maybe
think
something that if people are direct submitting, they need to be a little more conscious of
maybe
because they're gonna
if there's
have
a
to
specific
like
thing like
yeah,
they're trying to fill for, right, if there's like a call for a specific thing,
yeah.
that's one thing. But um if you are like, no, this is the book I want to write, here it is, like that is kind of the most
Yeah.
important thing I think about, like that part of the process.
Okay, I'm trying to make sure that everybody's questions got answered,
Mhm.
but I think they really did. And
Oh,
we're
great.
we're kind of getting down to time. Is there anything that I coming on the heels of write the book you want to write, which is like I think exactly where everybody went last month's meeting too, when I said,
Excellent.
is there anything that you would um uh that you wish somebody had told you earlier in the process or
Mm,
that would have been supportive to you? Because I know again, coming out of that nonfiction space, moving into now I'm a novelist, what's different, what's changed, but also like just what's important because people have this vision of okay, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to
right.
write in this garret, I'm going to mail it to an agent, an email now, I guess. It's going to come back, it's going to win the $100 prize, and then my sister's going to burn my book. um no, but what in there of our traditional view of a writer, what's not working currently, how what is a writer now?
Right. I think like, how do I put this? So I was really surprised by the kind of like emotional fallout of the book doing well,
Hmm.
which was, I now care very much about disappointing people, which is
Hmm.
literally not a thing I have ever cared about in my entire earth life. So that was a real, and I'm still trying to figure that out, to be clear, right? Like
Yeah.
I have not really like
The
fully
sophomore book
grappled.
curse.
That's not solved, by the way. That's
Yeah.
not solved. I'm in the middle of writing. I should say I'm in the middle of writing. I'm near the end of writing the sequel, and it is unquestionably the hardest thing I've ever done in my
Mhm.
entire life. I have start to finish rewritten this book 4 times. I am now approaching the end of like getting to like finally one good draft.
Mhm.
It has been so hard, and it has been so much harder because I am invested now in like the idea of my readers. And it's not like I need to do well because I need to replicate this again, or I need to like chase whatever. It's like I don't want to let these people down who love this universe and who love these characters and who had this great experience and who like really enjoyed this book. And like, on I know I shouldn't let that get to me, and that is for sure like making everything 85 times harder, but it is actually very difficult. Um and I think
Not
that
that I
like,
think that you would ever write anything bad, but if
thank you.
20 years of reading fan fiction has taught me anything, it's that we will put up with a lot of bad shit to spend time in a good world.
Well, that is actually very reassuring. Genuinely it is. And I hope like, it's again like I am making the thing I want to write. It's just
Mhm.
like, wow, is
Mhm.
it hard when you like actually do care about like bringing a gift to a readership. And I think that like having I think that we as writers are now like much more intimately aware of like our readership existing and what they're thinking and feeling like at all times. And
We
like
get
like there
immediate feedback now. We've got
there are
Goodreads, we've got
literally
yeah.
thousands of Goodreads reviews, and like that is terrifying. I explained to my partner once that it's like, what are the positive reviews are like being shot with thousands of Orbeez, like an individual Orbeez, somebody throws one at you. It's like, oh, that was like kind of a pleasant, funny thing. Haha, how nice. But when like literally thousands of Orbeez are dumped on you, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah, too many
and
Orbeez, not enough swimming
too
pool.
many too many Orbeez. And it's I can't hold all of these Orbeez. I can't carry, like, I don't know what to do. I can barely swim in them. Um, so like just processing that much feedback at all is, I'm really lucky it's positive, but like it kind of doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. It's just so much feedback all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made me like, I'm much less active on social media than I was, in large part just because like it's really hard. Like
Right.
it's really, really hard um to kind of like both do the work and also engage with that volume of feedback all of the
Yeah.
time. Um, and so yeah, I don't have like a solution, and I'm not like good at it yet, and I definitely have not figured it out, and it's for sure still in the like making everything harder stage for me, but like it is for sure a thing, and it is absolutely something that you should like think about and try and process, because like you are going to get reviews, and
Mm-hmm.
you need to figure out how to manage, whether they're, again, whether they're positive or negative, like how to engage or not engage at all with all of that stuff that's going to happen, and being kind of like aware of our readership, like I feel like it's, you're no longer kind of like writing in isolation
Yeah.
in your loneliness cabin, and like maybe someone sends you a handwritten letter once in a while. Like
Right.
it's very difficult to unplug from that, like, no, we all want to tell you like what we think of your book, which is wonderful, and also like, oh my goodness, so
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Folks, if you are not yet published or you're working on getting published, shameless plug, if you go over to Yeah Right, a couple of years ago, we did a thing called the Year of Fearless Writing. What is Tabby Cat Solidarity here?
Yep.
Um,
Oop. This is Gojira.
Hi, Pee.
Beep,
Oh, kitty
beep,
cat.
beep.
Um, Year of Fearless Writing, and we talk about making a web presence for yourself
Mhm.
and what you can do to position yourself to have a public author presence as opposed to your personal presence. And think
Mhm.
about that, because you're, even in your best case scenario, you're suddenly not Natalie, you're Natalie, author of Hinch.
Yep. And
And
that like definitely not having, I never really separated those things
mhm,
in my life in general, and in most ways that was the correct decision for me, but
mhm,
for sure it has made this process a lot harder, right? And
mhm.
that like, because it is part of my individual identity now, and it is
Yeah.
not separated. There is there's much less of that like like personal versus, or public versus private rather, separation, and there are
This is
emotional
a reminder.
consequences.
Hill Rowan.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Uh, the house ghost reminds us to take our meds here. In this house, we respect store-bought brain chemicals.
Same. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, no, it is. It's huge, and it's like there's a whole different weight to being a public persona, and uh and you can't just like necessarily say stuff off the cuff anymore. And I know that as a music journalist, as a games journalist, um, as you know, and which is, I certainly haven't touched music journalism, but I definitely touched gaming back when,
Mhm.
in the battle days, when we
Mhm.
cared about
Ah.
ethics and journalism. Uh, but
The time.
you know,
I was there, Gandalf.
right?
Mhm.
Uh, something something Narnia quote.
Mhm.
Uh, but do not speak to me of the deep magic. I was there when it was written. Um,
Mhm.
knowing, what can you say off the cuff versus what can you say versus now what's going to come back to haunt you. Like,
Mhm.
certainly I was not as developed a human being 10 years ago. And
Mhm.
now that social media has been a thing for decades and decades, like, just be aware, folks, that as you start to have a public persona, your public persona is speaking for yourself, it's speaking for your book. Look at what you get to say in your contract.
Mhm.
And you know, if you're going to write an incredibly famous series of books about wizards, maybe don't be a transphobe, um, eh, but yeah, so that
So
whole
true. It's
I just right?
so deeply
That
disappointing.
um, but, like, I don't bag on Joe Rowling every day, but most days, I will say most days. It's just
Mhm.
it's such an easy target, like,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
and every time I think it's gonna just, like, wear off, she makes sure that we're still talking about her, which,
Yeah, yeah.
in its own way is brilliant in terms of developing a public persona, I will
I
say,
mean, I
I
guess.
guess, I
Ooh.
guess. Um, but yeah, so the challenges don't go away, they just change.
Yeah, and, like, know like, knowing who you are and what you believe in and what kind of a person you are, and, like, you got to get really like good with your convictions. Do you know what I
Mhm,
mean? And that might mean examining some like really uncomfortable parts of yourself, right? That might mean like I need to get better at processing being called out. It might mean like,
mhm.
okay, this like somebody has told me a thing I've literally never thought about before, and now I
Right,
have
learning
to
how to handle that in
process
the
this.
moment.
Totally. Like you need to get really good at often very quickly at like dealing with uncomfortable situations with
Yeah,
grace, and not necessarily like, it's funny, and kind of like main charactering fictional people, you have to kind of unmain character yourself. It's
yeah,
like I am, right, like I am just a person here, I am going to make mistakes, I don't know everything, my experiences are not universal constants. um and like that's all kind of part of processing that feedback. It's not all going to be about your book. Like
yeah,
some of it is going to be about you, and that is also incredibly like important to learn how to like handle with some measure
mhm.
of grace, and also to be able to like kind of differentiate between um like, hey, this is something is being brought to me that I have to like genuinely consider, versus like, I think this person is being an asshole. And,
Right,
like
like, there's a
figuring
haters gonna
that
hate
out.
section, and then
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a, "This person hates me for a reason, and the reason is something that I did that I need to examine in myself and maybe apologize for
Totally.
and figure out how to do better."
hmm And being able to like do that discerning is really important. And you're not going to
Mhm.
get it right every single time.
No.
You can get better at getting it right more of the time, but you're not going to get right every single time. And figuring out, there's just like a whole bunch of other like social and parasocial and kind of emotional ramifications that are very difficult to
Mhm.
describe before they are happening to you.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah,
I
for sure.
definitely I've listened to a lot of writers say a lot of these kinds of things before experiencing it, and
Mhm.
I definitely thought I was prepared, and I was not.
Yeah.
Reader, she was not indeed prepared at all. So I think that like no matter how prepared and this is kind of I think true for like probably
Yeah.
every step of traditional publishing, is like you think you know and you think you are prepared, and you're just not going to be, and it is going to be a wild learning process the entire time, and that is okay and probably necessary, and like
Yeah.
you're not going to get everything right, and you are going to learn a lot, and it is all going to be okay.
Yeah, and that touches on something that we were talking about before our session started here, which was like traditional publishing has its whole own vocabulary. It's got its
Yes.
whole own like this is a submissions editor, this is a copy editor, this is a fact
hmm
checker, this is a proofreader, this is a
yep.
layout guy. These
hmm
all of these people have different jobs and you might
hmm
not know what it is.
yep.
So you're going to do a lot of learning on the fly and but one thing that you can do to help with that learning process and to help with that speed up that learning process, if you're not already in the industry like Natalie was, is that you can be in spaces where you can ask people things.
Absolutely.
Writers like knowing things, just in case you
Mhm.
hadn't noticed that about yourself, folks. Writers really like knowing things and they like sharing knowledge. Can't
My
stop the
Google
signal.
search history, man. Like I'm
Oh
sure the
God,
FBI agent enjoys it immensely. Um,
100%.
uh, but yeah, I mean, having people I mean, I agree. Writers
Yeah.
love being asked things all of
Who
the
is this
time. Like,
person? What do they do?
mhm.
What happens next? What the fuck is a submissions editor and why aren't they editing my stuff?
Right. When I was approached by my agent, the very first thing I did is go to like everybody I knew who had ever had contact with agencies and was like, do you know who this person is? Do you know their like, I could
Hmm.
Google them and like look at a website and it's like, okay, you are indeed with Cook McDermott, like you said you were, but also like do you know this man? Like, have you spent time on him? Would you vouch for them? Like, is it like doing
Right. What
those
what
kind
experience am
of
I going to have working with this person?
totally
We
like is
all
this
we all talk. We
yeah
all talk.
and that is a critical part of the process because I do think that like if you can trust your team, it like that is invaluable, right? Like
Yeah.
I know I can trust my agent, which means like there's a certain amount of cognitive weight I can offload because I
Yeah.
know he's not going to like let me do anything catastrophically stupid, right? Like
Right.
I
Yeah.
know that he's not going to like let something critical lapse. He's not going to let
Yep.
me sign something that is dangerous, right? Like so there's a certain amount of same thing with my partner, right? Like I absolutely know I can be like, "Listen, my brain is not processing this language. Can you please like make sure that this thing about the way the graphic novel adaptation would go is the way I think it is
Right.
and
Does this make
explain it to
sense?
me
Yeah.
totally using much smaller words or like, my editor like when they if I can't see the way through something and they're like this is working, this isn't and I don't necessarily like I can't
Yeah.
see that yet. I can just be like, okay, I'm just going to assume that you can see something that I don't right now
Yeah.
and being able to do any of that cognitive offloading at all is like so crucial. So doing the work kind of up front to make sure
Hmm.
that you can trust your team is like will reap such incredible benefits later on when you're just like at the end of a draft and you don't know what to do and you're like life is falling into a shambles around you.
Yes.
Ask me
Laundry
how I
hasn't been done in
know.
3 weeks. The
Totally,
the
and you're just
cat
like, "I
walk
just
hasn't been skied.
need someone to handle this that is not me," and if you have somebody that can handle that for you on your publishing team, incredible, incredible,
Yeah.
and take advantage of that if you can.
And that's the huge advantage of traditional publishing is that
Mhm.
you have that team. You're not you're gonna approve your book cover, but you don't have to find the person to make it. You're gonna
Mhm.
approve the edits, but you don't have to find the editor.
Yep.
All of those things. Natalie, thank you so, so, so much. I am not gonna keep you any longer. You've given us so much of your time and so much of your knowledge. Um, and yeah, thank you. Thank you again for joining us from way the heck on the other side of the continent.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you so much for inviting me. This was delightful. It's really fun talking about this stuff. Actually, like I was, uh, it's not something I get to do terribly often, and it is like a really like weird, cool industry when you're
Yeah,
kind of, also like deeply messed up. But like it's a weird, cool industry when you start like digging into like how this kind of shambling Howl's moving castle of an
yeah.
industry
Oh
even
God,
works.
yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.